Hi everyone, welcome to the launch for the latest State of Youth Civil Society report, Youth Power in a Pandemic. My name is Miali and I am the Communication and the Youth Officer of Madagascar YMCA, and I have been part of the researcher for this Youth Civil Society report as well. This new flagship report is a global youth-led publication that looks back over the past year and forward into the next to explore the realities that youth civil society and social movements are experiencing in their quest towards shifting power. It shines the spotlight on the different ways youth civil society has stepped up around the world to respond, recover, and rebuild. Yes, and I can see my colleagues putting a link to the newly launched report web page on the chat box, so you can click and view it. We hope you enjoyed listening to the opening music of this event. It is written and performed by one of the contributors to the first ever and not the latest State of Youth Civil Society report, La Mukura. La Mukura is a group made of young independent artists promoting social transformation through the arts. Their music reflects the multiplicity of the realities that coexist in the diversity and ancestry of South America. And you can learn more about their latest powerful works in our Youth Civil Society report. Now, let me hand it over to my co-moderator for this launch event to introduce himself and tell you about what you can expect over the next hour. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Miali. Hey everyone, welcome from me too. I'm Daniel Calarco. I'm based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I had the pleasure to be one of the co-researchers in the first Youth Civil Society report. I'm a human rights lawyer and a youth activist committed to sustainable development. Today, we are going to hear about the state of youth civil society in the world today. This is a powerful new report that we are launching today to capture and spotlight from 27 organizations and contains data from a global survey of some 868 members of youth civil society groups across 87 countries. But before we dive into the findings of this report any further, I'm delighted to welcome the UN Youth Envoy, who provided one of the forwards to this report. Ms. Jayakma Waikramanyak, I'm happy to turn over to you for some of the opening remarks that really speak to some of the big issues we'll be exploring today in this report.
Dear colleagues, friends, fellow young people, welcome to the launch of the State of Youth Civil Society Report 2022, Youth Power in a Pandemic. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Restless Development for this kind invitation and for collecting the immensely important data regarding youth-led efforts around the world. And of course, I want to thank young people for their invaluable contributions. When thousands of young people who are taking action to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic are being ignored, misrepresented, and attacked for their work, it is crucial that we use our voices and our platforms to amplify their hard-earned successes. Young people in the world today face multidimensional historical challenges. Their futures are continuously threatened by climate-related disasters, prolonged conflicts, and a global health pandemic. These crises are negatively impacting young people's access to education and meaningful employment, and thus the ability to survive and thrive. The political inaction and inadequate responses, coupled with systemic exclusion from decision-making spaces, often leave young people no other choice but to take matters in their own hands and head to the front lines. The State of Youth Civil Society report brilliantly showcases their journeys. I have enjoyed engaging with young people's stories as reflected in this report. From India to Sierra Leone, to Iraq, to Indonesia, North Macedonia, Colombia, United Kingdom, Palestine, and many other places, one thing is clear. There is no shortage of resilience, creativity, and drive for justice. Once again, young people remind us how quickly movements can adapt to new realities and how one community's pursuit for democracy can create a transnational movement of solidarity. In these challenging times, such inspiring efforts can be a lifeline and will benefit generations to come. However, young people's testimonies show that this comes at a cost. The historically fragile underfunding landscape of the youth civic space is at a breaking point. Symptoms of anxiety and depression among youth populations are reaching alarming rates, especially among youth groups most often left behind: adolescent and young women, LGBTIQ youth, young people with disabilities, displaced youth, and indigenous youth populations. These groups of young people are also often the last to benefit from increasingly digital participation opportunities in civic space, if they benefit at all. For many young people, access to stable internet connection and technological devices can also mean increased risk of threats, harassment, and surveillance. Dear colleagues, dear friends, we must lead a new way forward, as the report says, hand in hand with young people, shaping a more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future. Aspirations of young people are well documented in the recommendations of this report, as well as in global frameworks that can guide us towards that future, such as Youth 2030, the UN's first ever system-wide youth strategy, our common agenda, a transformation vision of global cooperation which prioritizes young people's meaningful inclusion, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and many more. Implementing these frameworks in partnership with young people has already delivered important results, and now we must keep up the momentum. Young people have spoken up. Now we must act. Thank you.
Okay. Let's say a big thanks to the Youth Envoy for setting the scene so brilliantly for a deeper dive into the State of Youth Civil Society report and recommendations. I am now going to invite Katie Webke, who is the lead researcher for this report, to take us through the main findings and recommendations. If you have any questions, do write them in the chat, and Katie will be staying with us after her presentation and will respond directly in the chat. Okay, over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Miali. Thank you, Daniel. And welcome, everyone. So great to see so many familiar people in the participant list and so many new faces too. I'm really happy to be here with you. It's morning here for me, but good afternoon, good evening to some of you too. This report has been a culmination of efforts of so many brilliant minds, and I was really happy to take the role as the research lead for this report and help pull this all together. I'm an international development consultant, and I'm specializing in groups like young people and getting it out there to see what's happening with them in their spaces, in their context. And this report is really the perfect example of just that. So before we really dive into the findings, I want to take one step back and just say, what is youth civil society? Well, for the sake of this report and for the sake of understanding what youth civil society is defined as a entity, and it could be a formal or an informal group that is youth-led, youth-focused, or youth-serving. These can be community groups, international NGOs, social movements, and more, but with the core at them, it's youth-led, youth-focused, or youth-serving. So that's what we mean when we talk about youth civil society. You can see here, and Daniel already introduced to us, that this report is really a culmination of so many people's work. We have 22 spotlight chapters. These are deep dives into specific issues and specific contexts. And these have been authored by 27 different groups. And we also did a big survey of youth civil society members. We reached nearly 900 people across 87 different countries. And then what we did from here is we pulled all of this data together, the spotlights, the survey, and generated a picture. What did the youth civil society look like last year during this time of the pandemic? So what is youth power? After we pulled together all of that data, we came up with main themes, is what we're calling them. And so these themes are the things that we saw come out across all of these contexts and all of these different spotlights. we have 7 main themes that we are able to uncover. So as you can see here on the screen, you can read these 7 themes for yourself. What I will do now is I'm going to go through each one of them and give you just a little taste of what's in the report. So definitely encourage you to go to the report, get the details. There's so much information in there. So what I'll present to you today is just a little bit of a taste of some of the main findings that we have in these themes. Before we start, just want to say the big picture across all of these themes. What we saw, 2021, youth civil society undoubtedly faced overwhelming challenges. These challenges provided an opportunity, though, for youth civil society to coalesce around the issues that they felt that many generations before them have ignored. These are issues like climate change and economic inequality, gender and racial inequities. So we see these as a main theme across all of the other themes. Okay, so maybe let's get started on the first theme. Our first theme is the state of youth civil society is threatened. And you can see that there are 4 main categories that we came up with within this theme, or 4 things that we saw within these themes. Right now, for the sake of time, I will just discuss 2 of them. So to start with the top, funding. Funding is a big one. The youth sector is historically less well-funded and supported than other sectors. But what we saw is that the pandemic had a major toll on funding. Nearly 3/4 of youth civil society groups experienced funding cuts. Of those, more than 1/3 experienced cuts to their existing funds. This indicates that donors actively withdrew funds as a result of the pandemic. The energy that youth civil society could have been bringing to strengthening community level response to the pandemic was instead focused in some cases on actually dealing with those reductions in funding. And what we saw as well is that local level, community-based and unregistered civil society groups were more likely to report decreased funding compared to other groups like movements and campaigns and formally registered national and international groups. Also, the funding cuts disproportionately impacted women and other marginalized groups. The other one that I'll talk about in this theme is mental health. So no other topic came out quite as many times across our spotlight chapters than youth mental health. And we noticed this largely because not only were young people impacted by the pandemic, as we all were, their stress is also compounded because many of youth civil society has been working on the front lines to respond and recover to the pandemic. So they face this double burden of experiencing the pandemic as individuals, but also being on the front lines and experiencing it, with the communities they serve. So what we did after we looked at these themes is we looked at the spotlight chapters. And for this theme in the spotlight chapters, if we can go on to the next slide, we were able to pull 3 main spotlights that spoke really well to this theme. So in each of the themes, we have organized spotlight chapters to kind of focus on. However, many of these spotlights cross many different themes, but these are the 3 that we think were really good examples of this one. I won't go through all of them in detail. I really encourage you to go and take a deep dive into these, but here's a glimpse to these 3 spotlights. And you'll actually hear from this first one on mental health and well-being of youth civil society members in India from one of my colleagues after I finish my session. So look forward to hearing that. So the next theme, our next theme is the state of youth civil society is resilient. And this theme is something that actually came up in the first State of Youth Civil Society report last year. That this focused on how youth civil society has been able to address the most urgent pandemic relief issues and social causes. This year, we saw a lot of that same pattern of resilience, but it differed a little bit in that this year, the sector tend to focus more on systemic and sustainable change and increasing youth leadership. In fact, we saw that more than half of survey respondents felt that the state of youth civil society is currently strong, and nearly as many, almost half, believe that it's stronger than ever before. And this is a big testament to the resilience despite the overwhelmingly hard year that we all had last year. We think that this could be in part because we've heard from about half of survey respondents that they thought civic space has actually become more open for young people to stand up for their rights. A large part of that is because nearly 1 in 5 respondents said that it was becoming more open in the digital space. So people are finding kind of a space for resilience in the digital space that opened up as a result of the pandemic. If we go and look at the spotlight chapters for the spotlight features for this theme, if you can jump to the next slide, please, we can see again that there are three spotlights that we're featuring here. There's a lot of really interesting lessons that we have from these spotlights. You'll hear from Hilda, who is an author for the Fridays for Future Spotlight. You'll hear from her in a little while at the end of the session. But you can see there are lots of different lessons we have here. Like, for example, in Sierra Leone, Youth Civil Society was able to learn from the Ebola crisis, and they were able to apply those same lessons. So it's another demonstration of how we're able to kind of sustain these lessons across time. Let's go to the third theme now. Our third theme is the state of youth civil society is responsive. And this responsiveness is largely spurred by the need to adapt. Sometimes adaptations were born out of necessity, and other times they came from opportunity. But across the board, we saw 93% of youth civil society has had to make adaptations as a result of the pandemic. The majority of those adaptations have been operational. This includes things like switching to virtual or hybrid programming, but it also includes things like addressing internal needs of their staff and volunteers. Interestingly, nearly all youth civil society organizations, 87%, adapted their operations to respond to mental health issues in some way. This could be things like introducing flexible working hours or creating peer-to-peer groups. We saw a lot of diverse responses to that, which is very interesting. Another type of major adaptation was a change in programming. So we saw about a third of youth civil society groups made a change to programming as a result of the pandemic. This is things like incorporating public health protocols into their programming, getting more involved in advocacy, and sometimes it even required them to switch the topics of their programming focus. So for example, Frida noticed that in their granting mechanism, that young feminist organizations before the pandemic were requesting things like funds for networking and alliance building. But since the pandemic, these organizations are overwhelmingly requesting grants for things like strengthening community resilience and addressing well-being. So it's a big change that they've even noticed regarding programming in their granting. We've also seen some strategic changes. These have been less common than the other types, but definitely noticeable, and largely they take the form of creating some new partnerships. Sometimes those are traditional partnerships, like between civil society groups, but sometimes they were non-traditional collaborations, such as with schools, for example. These spotlight chapters for this theme, again, we have 3. You can get a glimpse here. I already introduced one on the feminist realities a little bit. We have lots of different things, including a spotlight that's about how we were able to adapt youth-led research. So getting creative and innovative with youth-led research to be able to respond and adapt to the new reality. This is the Asian Development Bank, Cambridge University spotlight chapter here. So let's jump to the 4th theme. I hope we still have some energy. Let's take a big breath for the 4th theme. Ready? Okay, so this is a fun one because the state of youth civil society is creative. And I think that nobody would be surprised by this, but it came out really strongly in response to the pandemic. It actually required youth civil society to even become more creative than they already are, right? We know that young people are more apt to keep pace with a rapidly changing world, and they're often more connected to diverse segments within their communities. This enables youth civil society to reach their audience in ways that are more creative because they have figured out how to personalize and uniquely kind of reach these audiences. And more so, youth civil society has more freedom to experiment and improvise and innovate typically than more traditional groups, typically because they have less formalized structures and less bureaucracy within them. They are more agile and more free from the restraints of the traditional institutions and hierarchies. Creativity can look like things like art and theater and music and flash mobs, but then it's not only characterized by art forms. It also looks like finding innovative ways to reach an audience, finding solutions to those that are kind of alternative ways to share ideas and generate conversation. For example, in Myanmar, an organization called Sisters to Sisters brought attention to the issue of political prisoners by having these prisoners write personal letters directly to the public and publishing them. The spotlights, thanks, you can go ahead and jump to the spotlights, that's great. I won't get into the details on all of these, but for those of you who were here at the very start of the session, that beautiful music that you were listening to when we launched was from La Mukura, and this is one of our featured spotlights. They had a really, really powerful music and film in response to the national strike. So I highly encourage you all to look up them, and you'll be really moved, I think, by a lot of what they've been able to create to protest. We also have some spotlights that feature things like street theater, but also a campaign by young volunteers who are able to combat mis and disinformation online in a quite creative way. Next theme, we're up to theme number 5 of 7, so we're getting there. And this theme is outspoken. So recent research and polls have found that young people have become increasingly disillusioned with government. They're losing interest in traditional forms of governance, and this has become especially more prominent in the wake of what they perceive as government inaction due to the pandemic. So rather than, stepping away from advocacy and activism, youth civil society has been stepping up. They've been mobilizing in parallel spaces, often creating platforms outside of the traditional kind of formalized governance spaces. These could be things like transnational movements that many of us are quite familiar with, that we spoke of earlier in the session. However, what we are seeing is that young people are still not becoming adequately supported as leaders. So while they may be taking the lead in advocacy and activism, they're still not quite getting that seat at the table when things start to rebuild again. If we think of the Arab Spring, for example, youth civil society was at the forefront of breaking down those structures. However, a lot of those same foundational structures are still being rebuilt again without the involvement from youth civil society. And this happens not just in government, but also in the civil society sector as a whole, when large bodies like international NGOs or UN institutions are often not offering the same kind of solidarity needed for community-led youth advocacy, and instead tend to support the more formalized structures like registered youth civil society organizations. So what we saw in the survey is that 92% of youth civil society felt that much more support from power holders is needed for their activism. Again, we have 3 spotlights in this theme. You can see here that we have a variety of different topics from different perspectives. 2 of these relate to large protest movements like End SARS movement, police brutality in Nigeria, and a kind of global picture of transnational activism. But we also have some specific spotlight on how youth civil society groups in a variety of contexts have been advocating for vaccine equity and ending vaccine apartheid, particularly related to the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, the next theme we're going to talk about is community focused. This is our second to last theme here. This is a very important one. Youth civil society groups are typically based in the communities where they're working. This gives them access to a deeper understanding of the issues, the needs, and of course, the context. Young people have a feeling of responsibility toward their local communities and the desire to create a better future for themselves, but also for the people who they love. And they're motivated to see the impacts, the visible impacts of their action. As a result of this really strong community orientation, young people are often able to identify the needs in the community many times before larger and more established entities even realize there's a problem. And youth civil society can form and leverage their networks. These are things like reaching people through social media or university groups, whatever that may be, to meet these urgent public needs when other institutions around them fail. You'll hear from one of our colleagues from Lebanon, how Nation Station was able to do exactly this. They have a really strong and powerful story about how they were able to step in quickly when other institutions weren't able to reach people in Lebanon in the wake of the blast, but then also in the recovery from the pandemic. a big way that youth civil society has been in the community is responding to COVID-19 in what we found are the most impactful responses that people felt as a whole that youth civil society has done. The big one is spreading information and awareness. So youth civil society has been at the front lines of getting information out there about COVID-19 into their communities, combating mis and disinformation, spreading messages about personal hygiene, things like this. So let's look quickly at the spotlight chapters here. You will see a spotlight chapter in this theme by our beautiful Miali, who is one of the hosts today. We have a variety of different topics that we can cover. I mentioned the story from Lebanon already that you'll hear from in a moment, so definitely check those out. And our final theme is justice-driven. So the state of youth civil society is justice-driven. We understand that COVID-19 crisis has not equitably impacted populations. People of color and women are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, and youth civil society recognizes this. They see the gendered impacts and they see the racial inequities, and many of them have taken direct action. We saw about 80% of them said that they took direct action in these. These are things like increasing attention toward the mental health for women or gender minority identities of their staff. A quarter of them are providing resources or materials to staff on anti-racist or racial justice principles. These are just some examples of how even within their organizations, youth civil society has been, really increasing attention toward these inequities. One thing though that's really important, if we go back one second, one thing that's very important to note that we found is that despite the really strong focus on inclusivity being, big in the programming and what they're doing within their organizations, we still see that the sector is often led by young people who are coming with higher education or middle or upper class socioeconomic backgrounds. This could be in part because the majority of youth civil society representatives are unpaid. We actually saw about 9 out of 10 report that they're unpaid as volunteers or movement leaders or board members. So this over-reliance on unpaid volunteers in the youth civil society sector can actually make the sector more fragile and less well representative of the communities that they serve, which speaks back to the very first point about funding being a big issue within the sector. Okay, so let's jump to the spotlights. These are our last 3 spotlights to highlight. We see a variety of topics here, things like period management during the pandemic, girls' education in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And we also have a poem that you'll hear during this session about racial justice. So this is a really diverse number of spotlights here. So moving on here, just to kind of sum up all of that, youth civil society, we know we faced a lot of challenges, but we know that it gave an opportunity to, demonstrate resilience and creativity and adaptability. But really, youth civil society can't do this work on their own. We need support from the wider international community for the work. Youth civil society leaders feel overwhelmingly that the most important way that they could be better supported, there are 2 main ways. One is to be better funded, and the other is to be given more leadership role and decision-making responsibility. So we have some recommendations that I'll briefly highlight here, and they're for 4 different stakeholder groups, but all of them have those 2 main themes. So if we look first at the international and national community or national civil society organizations, you could read these for yourself, and please check out the report because there's much more detail about some specifics of these recommendations in the report. But briefly, to sum this all up, for international and national CSOs, youth civil society is recommending that we focus on building long-term relationships with youth civil society in these organizations and give way to youth groups whenever possible. Especially from foreign NGOs, they need to avoid monopolizing the sector, and they need to make sure to share civic space and stand in solidarity with youth civil society. Listen to these groups and foster a movement. This really requires providing tailored support and providing the type of leadership opportunities that young people express that they want and that they need. If we move to the donor group, we have some recommendations here. Again, please, get more detail in the report itself. But the main idea with all of the recommendations to donors is that we really need to focus on shifting the power and providing youth civil society with flexible, core, long-term funding. Funding needs to be holistic and responsive, needs to be multi-year, and it needs to be timely to ensure that despite any crisis that occurs, that organizations and movements can have the capacity, they can have the resources to respond and to rebuild. Another big thing that we need to think about related to the donors is that we need to really decolonize aid. We need to adopt less bureaucratic structures. These need to have more manageable requirements that can make grants more accessible for youth civil society groups. Remember, so youth civil society is often more informal and oftentimes unregistered compared to other types of civil society groups, non-youth. So because they're unregistered and more informalized, a lot of the bureaucratic requirements by donors keep them out of the pool of opportunities for grants and funding. And this is really a problem for youth civil society to live up to their potential. We found through the survey that the youth civil society sectors overwhelmingly said that the types of support they got tend to be in forms like training and coaching, but it neglected the gaps in financing that were really exacerbated during the pandemic. So they are really requesting a shift in the way that they're supported. The next group is to government stakeholders. So we have some recommendations next for governments. The main things we need to think about for governments that we need to recognize youth groups as partners. We need to have a dedicated space for them in decision-making, demonstrate this through supporting and promoting youth participation in formal mechanisms that function at all levels across governance on a regular basis. And importantly, there need to be meaningful policies in place that support the well-being of young people and the strength of youth civil society. Governments need to provide a guarantee for the physical, the digital, and the legal safety of youth civil society and young people at large to demonstrate their rights to act and to demand to deliver change, and they need to be able to do this safely. Finally, our last set of recommendations is to young leaders in civil society directly. We need young leaders to continue to demonstrate that the ability of young people to be the leaders in rebuilding a fairer and more sustainable future. And they need to be holding governments and other organizations accountable for the promises and actions made. Youth civil society need to be a strong partner for each other, especially worldwide in contexts and communities where organizations that are operating, particularly in the global south, for example, or other places where groups aren't able to organize safely or organize actions due to the restrictions they experience. We need to be partners for each other and support them. And very, very importantly, we hear you. Mental health and well-being of young leaders is really on the decline, and we need to be mindful of who we work with and volunteer with and be actively engaged to monitor needs, take care of each other by listening and reaching out thoughtfully and understanding that all the needs are intersectional across different groups. So to the next slide, I'll leave you with this really powerful quote. I'll let you read that so you can read that in the voice of the youth activist, but I'll just leave you with my thoughts. What we saw from this report, youth civil society solutions to the pandemic have demonstrated an intersectional and a context-specific blueprint for rebuilding communities in the wake of the pandemic. Young leaders can provide us with this way forward to a fairer and more resilient, a more sustainable, and importantly, in a more equitable world. So as we continue into 2022, I'm positive that we're going to see many, many more examples of youth civil society making positive changes despite the systemic exclusion that they continue to face. But really, it's now all up to us how we're going to support youth leaders and youth civil society to do what they've been doing all along, and that's to lead us toward a more equitable and a more sustainable future. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll be around. I'll check the chat for any questions, but thanks for the opportunity to share the highlights.
Thank you, Katie. It was so impressive. Thank you so much for the detailed and thoughtful presentation of findings. And yes, we are resilient and creative, and we also have to fight being outspoken and threatened. And I'm so glad to be here with several young leaders across the globe who I see the chat popping up with questions and informations. And as a reminder, if anyone has questions for Katie, please share this in the chat box, as Katie will be staying with us for the remainder of the event and can respond while we move on to the next speakers. Now, we have the opportunity to hear from two of the report contributors who are going to take us all on a deeper dive into the state of youth society, the state of youth civil society in their countries and contexts. First, I'm delighted to introduce Sarojini Sapru, Assistant Program Coordinator for Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning at Restless Development, India. Sarojini and her team led some really important research in exploring how the mental health of young people in India has been impacted over the past year. Sarojini, can you shine a spotlight for us on some of the main finds on your research?
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to sharing a spotlight and talking about the experience of young leaders from India who we interviewed. So in India, young leaders associated with civil society organizations acted as frontline workers during the pandemic, providing critical relief work and essential services during some of the hardest times that we've had to experience in modern history. As frontline workers, these young leaders experienced unprecedented emotional and physical stress. And Restless Development India conducted interviews with 114 of these leaders between the ages of 18 to 29 from 5 states across different parts of the country. Our research focused on these leaders' experiences both as individuals and as members of civil society spaces. And what we found was alarming, though not surprising. While all young leaders said that they had been affected by the pandemic, their experiences are not homogeneous. Factors such as gender identity, urban-rural positionalities, among others, play a key role in determining how they experience and engage with their mental health. Mental health services, if they exist, were challenging to access, especially for young women and those living in more rural areas due to many factors, including the stigma associated with accessing these services. Education, a loss of livelihoods, financial instability on a personal front, and frontline challenges, the fear of being infected by COVID, infecting their family members, and the lack of organizational funding available to local community organizations all pushed young leaders to experience severe distress. Through our research and spotlight, we aim to showcase the solutions that young leaders recognize and are demanding to ensure sustainable and equitable change in their communities. Because as one young leader noticed, positive impact to mental health can only come through sustainable and structural change. What do young leaders want? Young leaders want platforms to really hear the voices of young people. Young people already have the solutions and all can work together to create solutions. We just need to listen to them. Youth forums and platforms were highlighted as one of the key asks by young people to support their mental health. Young leaders across all states noted the role and importance of community organizations in working with diverse young people from different marginalized groups across the country. In many instances, they highlighted that the work to build collaborations and networks at a grassroots level is already underway and needs to be recognized and amplified in order to maximize impact, provide support by increasing visibility. They also highlighted the need for larger developmental organizations to come together in targeted ways to support and fund smaller organizations. Young leaders in Jharkhand specifically noted the importance of states to engage in gender-inclusive planning when managing and mitigating the effects of disasters, including the pandemic. As most activities, including those related to education or professional opportunities, shift online, young leaders remind us that we cannot ignore the very real digital divide in this country. Online solutions are challenging for those in rural areas and particularly for women. The gender digital divide needs to be acknowledged when conceiving development solutions. Overall, findings from our research highlight the manner in which the pandemic has disproportionately affected young people. Young leaders' experiences of mental health and well-being have been diverse across India. Different groups have experienced different and unique challenges, and it is important that as we come together, these differences are acknowledged and the solutions that are generated take into account the needs and priorities of young leaders, who in many spaces are already at the forefront of leading sustainable solutions in their communities.
Thank you so much, Sarojini, for sharing these insights, and in particular, the solutions for how young people mental health can and should be better supported by governments, by other young leaders, and formal and informal institutions. I would now like to invite another report author to join me and tell us about her experience in Lebanon, a country that has been deeply impacted by multiple crises over the past couple of years. Aya, welcome. Please introduce yourself and tell us more about the nation station and your experience this past year.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity of being a part of this, first of all. So as some of you may know, Lebanon has been facing multiple crises, probably since the end of 2019, marked by the October 17 revolution. And this is when we started witnessing a downfall in the socioeconomic situation of the country. Later on, as of August 8th of 2020, we were faced with the Beirut port blast, which killed over 200 people, displaced over 300,000 people, and injured over 6,000. This really impacted Lebanon's already failing system, basically. And so we saw a lot of discrepancies within people's lives, from being able to support their families, to a lot of people were losing their jobs, a lot of people lost access to healthcare. And this is where Nation Station was born. It was 2 days after the blast. And what we did was we were a group of maybe 5 neighbors and friends who all met up in an abandoned gas station. And this is where we set up our operations. So each person brought whatever they knew best how to do to the table. One of us is a farmer, so we started distributing vegetables. One of us is a cook, so we started cooking meals. I personally had my computer skills, so we started creating a database of all of the people who required assistance. One of us works in the medical field, and so on and so forth. So we were able to have multiple different types of departments to be able to to be able to help all of the people who needed help. So initially we had no clue that we would still be ongoing up until now, but the situation just kept getting worse and worse. And nowadays Nation Station is focused on being a community center, a community hub for all of the neighbors that live around us. And we are all working together to be able to find more sustainable solutions to all of the problems that we're facing. So we're currently facing multiple different types of problems, such as electricity cuts. We have constant power cuts. It's very unstable here. There's a huge lack of access to healthcare, where we are currently providing people with medication and with medical help, such as free visits to doctors and specialists. We also offer free therapy to whomever needs it, so like psychological support. And we have our kitchen, which offers hot meals to over 200 families every other day. And we are really built by a really strong net of community members who are our neighbors and who are volunteers who come from sometimes very far parts of Lebanon to be able to come and support. And we do face a lot of difficulties currently, but we're not going to stop anytime soon. We all know that with the support of all of these different initiatives and different people, we will be able to hopefully get to a fruitful place. Now there is, I think, a presentation where we could show the photos. So we only have 3 photos here, but so this is Katja, one of our volunteers, who is a pharmacist, and it's basically one of our medical distributions, medicine distributions. So a lot of people, as I said, have lost access to their healthcare. Medicine prices have shot up drastically, and a lot of medicines are not even available in pharmacies or in hospitals. So we have been facing a lot of problems regarding that. But we are receiving support from different types of actors, from personal initiatives, where we are still currently able to support people who need different types of medication, ranging from like the most simple medication, which is paracetamol, to like really important ones, such as medication for hypertension, for diabetes, and so on and so forth. Now, the next photo is one of our lovely volunteers, Norma, who really is a mother figure to us. She's the head cook at Nation Station's Community Kitchen. And here we see her packing one of the meals. So we have pickups and deliveries for meals as well. We, as I said, have around 200 families who are supported through this program, and they can come to our station directly, or some of them who need more specialized support are sent their meals to them. And I think the last photograph is another one of our wonderful volunteers, Anas, who is a volunteer in the station's kitchen, as well as one of our neighbors, Lodi. And so I really love this photograph because it really shows how much of a family we've grown to become over the past 2 years. I mean, it really feels like a family with all of the neighbors around us. And it's a very nice space to be in, because at the end of the day, we're all working to be able to get to a better place all together. If anyone has any question, I'll be happy to answer. And I will share with you a link to our GoFundMe if you would like to share it, or a link to our Instagram and website if you would like to check out more of what we do. And thank you very much again for letting us be a part of this. And I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Sarojini and Haya, for sharing this powerful spotlight with us. They really highlighted some of the very real and very big challenges facing youth civil society in different parts of the world, but also demonstrate the strength and resilience of young people to find solutions and to take action. Now, before handing over to Hilda Flavia, who is a well-known climate and environmental rights activist and the founder of Fridays for Future Uganda, for her final reflections and looking to the future and what this holds for youth civil society in her view, I want to give us the opportunity to hear from one more of our spotlight contributors, Vincent Folks. Vincent Fox is an artist, poet, and entrepreneur living in the United States of America. Vincent has written an original work for this report called The Change. Vincent believes there is a power in using our voice, but so many young people still struggle with speaking up and voicing their opinions. He believes that the act of speaking up allows for everyone to participate, voice their feelings about what is happening, and it comes with a feeling of empowerment. So this is why he wrote this poem, to use his voice to share our youth experience of racial injustice and youth empowerment. Enjoy it.
The world's dying and disappearing like mine. Some of us on the islands, some of us in the highlands. Glaciers are melting, crying, and fire in the streets. Long lost intelligence, we need some release. Mothers, brothers, aunties, sisters dying in the streets at the hands of the ones that they account for the least. Pulling out their guns to end our lives as we retreat. Had to fight them back, the tongue holds power when we speak. Bit inside America, the taste is bittersweet. They don't want us here no more, they telling us to leave. There ain't gonna be nowhere to go if y'all can never see that without all the immigrants, this country wouldn't be. See a petition, feeding the children just to keep us alive. Pushing for change, but we need more than the budget. This education system just doesn't cut it. We strategize, we plan further to get further. Teach the community its true history, and we open doors. Provide the resources they locked away just to raise the score. Like how to plan ahead and how to share the wealth. Not to mention therapy for our mental health. Owning black businesses to earn for a cause. Yeah, we still young, but we think it's time they pass the baton. Cause it's 2022, we done fighting period poverty. Raised a couple million and set the people free and then dispersed all the proceeds. Look at what empowerment can do when we spread amongst the youth. Because to believe that something is true is to see it being done. So when they see us fighting back, the mission's only partly done. So as we all learn about the power we all hold, check into the present. Where there is change, there is a team. Following a golden spark, our ancestors left in our dreams. Pushing us to play our part so that the world can really see. All it really takes is a thought, a drop, a seed.
Now, yeah, that's so impressive. Thank you, Vincent, for this contribution. And now, finally, over to you, Hilda. Can you tell us about what you hope the future holds for youth civil society? What are some of the challenges, but also, of course, the opportunities ahead of us?
Hi, I am Hilda. I'm really proud to be joining this launch event today as a spotlight contributor to the State of Youth Civil Society report. For this report, I had the opportunity to gather insights from across our Global Fridays for Future movement that was started by Greta Thunberg, a Swedish climate activist. While doing this research, I had many powerful stories of resilience from our members, stories of empowerment, stories of action, and stories of making change happen. But I also had stories about many struggles in the past years. Struggles that I realized from reading this report are shared across youth civil society, where young activists passionate about changing the world like me have also faced threats, anxiety, funding cuts, and discrimination in different ways. It has been a hard year. But what is clear to me is that young people won't wait around for change to happen. Despite being frustrated by what is happening in the world around us, we are taking action, and this report clearly shows the increasing activism from young people around the world over this past year on critical issues, especially gender, anti-racism, and climate. We have been mobilizing in our hundreds and in our thousands. We are channeling our passion, knowledge, and creativity to create a better, more just and sustainable world. I know though that we are all worried about the future, especially looking at what is happening in the world right now. I have watched the news daily and hear how despite our protests, asks, and ambition in Fridays for Future, climate change is still having a catastrophic impact in our lives. From floods and landslides in Brazil, cyclones like Anna that devastated Fiji, to the record-breaking snowfalls in Madrid. But we have to have hope. We have to have hope because our generation, young organizers, organizations, networks, and movements will remain unwavered in our commitment for a better world. And despite the many challenges facing us right now and in the future, we will continue to react and we will continue to stand up for our rights. I call on you to help us make this better world happen. Help us by connecting with and supporting youth civil society. Recognize there is strength in our diversity, power in our solutions, and compassion in our hearts. We deserve to live in a world of freedom, happiness, harmony with nature, and equality. And it is young people like me and the others who contributed to this report who are going to make sure we get there. Please take time to read this report. Take that time to understand our stories, explore the data, and think about how you, each and every one of you, with your own power and role, can respond to our recommendations. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you to all the youth organizations, movements, and networks who spent time contributing to this report. I am proud of what we have achieved together.
Yes, we are going to keep fighting and creating new realities. Thank you so much, Huda. And that's it for us. Thank you so much for every single one of you for joining today. Please do read the report because that's a powerful publication. We will again just share the link to the beautiful report webpage in the chat. I see my colleague Freya sharing, and several young people from across the globe pop up with comments and contributions in the chat.
Yes, we recommend you to really take time to look at those report recommendations, whether you are a government, funder, organization, or a young activist. There are clear and practical actions you can take to help give support and strengthen your civil society. If you want to find out more information or to contact the Restless Development about the report, please reach out to the team and they're going to put contact information in the chat right now. And thank you again for joining us today. And we say goodbye for now. Bye.
Bye.